Hey guys, welcome back. Tisha here, back with another reading of Lost Boy, the true story of one man's exile from a polygamous cult and his brave journey to reclaim his life. It is by Brent W. Jeffs with Maya Salovich. I always want to say Mia every single time. Maya, it's not that hard, especially because that's the way my sister spells her name. But for whatever reason, I keep on wanting to say Mia. Hey guys, happy Tuesday to you because it's going to be Tuesday when you see this. We'll be having two readings this week because I owe my Big Love fam 3 videos because I did absolutely none last week. But let's go ahead and get into it. So we are on chapter 17, Dazed and Confused. Go ahead and hit the like button as we jump into it. Brandon peeled out burning rubber as we left the driveway. His car was fast and the speed was liberating as he drove us away from the compound. The Mustang had previously been used for highway patrols. Now it was helping me escape. The sense of freedom I felt was like 1,000,000 pounds had been lifted off my shoulders. I couldn't restrain my joy. I couldn't stay a second longer. I needed to find a place in the world and understand the strangeness of the place I'd come from, the incredible power of our community, religion, and leaders to shape our lives both for good and ill. Only then could the pain that my whole family suffered mean something more. The fact that he, as a teen, is doing this is yet another teen that is trying to take control. The last book we read, The Polygamous Daughter, she did the same thing where she tried to escape when she was a teen. And here he is as a teen. I think, he's 15 at this time. And he is leaving all that he ever knew on the compound because he's tired of the mumbo jumbo. We drove down the steep, twisting roads from the mountain into a flat, anytown America of strip malls and tract housing that is suburban Salt Lake. Brandon was soon taking me through the small 2-bedroom apartment that would now be home to 5 Jeff's brothers. I would be sleeping on the floor, later moving up to the couch. So 5 of his brothers are in this home. 5 of them are trying to figure out what to do with their lives. 5 of them are struggling in various ways because they've left all that they known. That says a lot, right? That even though they tried to get away, they're still using each other as some form of comfort out of the compound. But let's continue. All I had with me was a duffel bag filled with clothes, most of them useless hand-me-downs. I was sick of them and of being told what to do, of having every single part of my life regulated by my religion or my father. From now on, I would wear what I wanted, not what they told me I had to. I would be my own man. I didn't realize then how hard it would be to make my own choices. I really didn't know how to live or move through the world or what was expected of me. I'd barely even ordered for myself at a restaurant. I'd never brought any of my own clothes. When I was a child, no one had ever asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. Wow. That was for the prophet to decide? The prophet even decides what they're going to be when they grow up? Wow, they really control every facet of life. We weren't encouraged to have our own ideas about it. I never daydreamed about being a fireman or a movie star or a basketball player like most kids do. My future was in God's hands, so wishing for something that might not happen would only court disappointment. No longer called to be one of the prophet's chosen people, I hadn't the vaguest idea what I wanted. After Brandon led me inside, I sat down on the couch and looked around. It was unnerving not to have anything I had to do, no one to report to, no priesthood meeting or church service or Saturday workday to attend. I wasn't used to the aimlessness of not being in school or work or church and not being at the mercy of my dad's moods, not having to worry about what I was going to say. Part of me liked it, but the other part was filled with fear. That old fear of eternal hellfire, endless pain and damnation, the fear that I had turned my back on God. I sat there in the pit of my stomach, not going anywhere. Leaving home had brought it back again, just like starting ninth grade. I considered going back for a moment, but then I said, F that, it's time to party. I sat in our small living room with four of my older bros. Brandon handed me a Bud Light. At the time, he was 18 and worked in telemarketing. So you're going from this one place where you're bound and you're coming to this other place where you feel free, but are you really free if your idea of fun is just drinking? And you're not even of age. A lot of them aren't of age to drink. And here they are drinking away their sorrows, not really dealing with all that's happened to them. That's years of unpacking to do. But I'm just saying, like, they haven't even begun the work. My half brother Nathan was the same age. He cracked open another beer. Nathan's much more emotional and high strung than Brandon, with light brown hair and rust colored eyes, 6'1", and a bigger build. He and my brother David, who was 21, worked in construction. Big D had been the one who insisted I was welcome, who told me to move in any time, despite how crowded the place was. As we toasted my new freedom, he said he was glad that I finally joined them, and I could see that he meant it, even though there were really too many people living there already. Clayton, then 25, worked as a server in a restaurant. Though I didn't know it when I moved in, by then he had started selling cocaine and was using heroin. He had become involved with some extremely violent dealers. Dave was also using hard drugs, but they tried to keep that stuff far away from their younger brothers. It's so sad. It is so sad that a lot of these lost boys turn to things like this, turn to substance abuse. They're given no skills. And unless they run into people to help them, a lot of them probably might, run down this path. It was a roller coaster living with my brothers. I was excited, then scared all the time. My first few weeks were a blur of marijuana, smoking, and drinking. Although I didn't realize it at the time, the Lost Boy label was pretty accurate. Like Peter Pan sidekicks, we had never really grown up. We've been trapped in our own sick, but also sheltered never land. And we were completely unprepared for what faced us in what now passes for American reality. So we got high. At first, I was afraid to even go out of the apartment alone. It wasn't just paranoia from smoking pot, although that might have added to it, and it wasn't because the apartment was in a bad neighborhood. The building was in serious need of a paint job, and many of our neighbors did not seem as though they had legitimate sources of income. We heard lots of shooting and even gunshots from time to time, but even that really wasn't why I was afraid of going out by myself. It was more that I felt exposed and self-conscious, almost as if I'd come from another planet. I didn't know what I was supposed to do in the most basic situations, like going to a party or club. I had been dropped into a new culture with little idea of the unwritten social codes. In my first few months out, in fact, I came across a real weirdo. I'd go to the Cottonwood Mall with my brothers, and they would go up to girls, and I'd freeze. I didn't know how to approach them, and I didn't know what to say. And when they'd come over to me, I'd just stand there and stare. I don't know what they must have thought was wrong with me. I guess I was afraid to be faced with experiences or questions that would make me look stupid and reveal that I didn't know things a guy my age really should know. I didn't want to look like a chump. So I stuck with my brothers, going out mainly with them, rarely alone, observing everything. Safely back in our apartment, I would sit on the couch thinking about my life, trying to make myself calm down. Is he not going to school? Like, what happened to school? Maybe this is over summer break or something, but I don't hear him saying anything about school. Okay, let me continue. Safely back in our apartment, I would sit on the couch thinking about my life, trying to make myself calm down. I spent a lot of time zoning out, watching TV. Mostly that kept me occupied. But then the fear would overwhelm me again, and I'd think about damnation and being terrified about my decision to leave and scared to go back. And scared to go back. You could never know if they would take you back. Of course, that was up to Warren. You might confess and repent and still be shunned. And who knew what God's judgment might be? The fear overwhelmed rational thought and consideration. It was paralyzing. My brothers would sit there and tell me that what I'd been taught wasn't true, that the church was wrong and that I'd be okay. Brandon especially told me not to take that stuff seriously. He'd sit with Nathan or me or whoever was freaking out and just insist over and over that it would get better. It's just a life of the unknown. It's so sad that they do this to these kids. However, at times, it didn't feel like I'd ever fit in. But after about a month, I got sick of being poor and decided to get a job. I'd never before worked with Gentiles in the outside world, only for church businesses with their child labor and low pay and questionable safety standards. I was almost certainly in more danger doing sandblasting in Colorado City, but I was more scared now because I didn't know what to do working among strangers. Nathan found a place for me at the construction company where he worked. I was a rover, the lowest man on the totem pole. My job was mostly cutting wood to frame houses and doing what the other guys told me to do. Fortunately, they trained me before I began to work, so I didn't have to figure out safety practices on the job. Even so, I was still afraid of the boss and shy with coworkers that it took months before I could bring myself to talk to them directly about any problems I had or materials I needed rather than having Nathan speak for me. The job didn't mean I had my own money. However, I began chipping in on the $700 a month rent. I spent most of my first paycheck on new clothing. My brothers took me to the mall and I bought a pair of Lucky jeans, an indigo blue Billabong shirt, Billabong, Billa bong, Bong, okay, t-shirt, a yellow Fox Racing shirt, and a red Lucky Brand shirt. That was all I could afford because those clothes were so expensive, but it was the first time I'd ever chosen my own clothing and worn something that wasn't hand-me-down. I was styling. Look, the other day, I haven't bought clothes in the mall in a long time, and the other day, I went to my cousin's baby shower, and I I should have known better, y'all. Sorry, y'all. Story time real quick. I should have known to read the invitation for myself. I did not because my mom was going with me, whatever, whatever. So I wasn't concerned about any of that. Long story short, we were supposed to wear all white. Guess who had some of the brightest colors in the world to wear at the baby shower? So I had to go to the mall to buy some pants, which my cousin said it was okay, but I always talk about people who don't follow protocol, so I didn't want to be one of those people who wasn't following protocol, and I spent 60 something dollars on a pair of dress pants and they were on sale. And I said to myself, this is why I often don't shop at the mall. Because it's ridiculous. Anyways, so I'm hearing the clothes that he said and how expensive it was. And I can only imagine for him, who that was, his first time getting a check and having to do all that it really was a reality thing for him because he's so accustomed to not buying name brand things and getting hand-me-downs or shopping in secondhand stores that it just had to probably really really wake him up. Y'all know my mind goes on a tangent and I gotta get it out or my reading is gonna be trash. Okay, back to the actual book. What you're here for. All right, so I was styling. However, now that I left my parents and was no longer distracted by fighting with them and by their fights with each other, I began to be overcome by confusion. I had never had to make my own long-term plans before. I hadn't been taught to have dreams of a different way of living, one that I could control. I never thought about what I wanted to do with my life or what its purpose was. Much of what I've been taught in church had been completely crazy, but there were also things that I deeply valued in my upbringing. It was hard to know what to keep and what to throw away. I had to choose a new set of values and ideals, but your values guide your choices in the first place. How do you choose new ones without being influenced by the old ones, which you now question? It was dizzying. I never really had a chance to develop my own interests either. I've never really thought about this. I never thought about how much of their lives are controlled. He's really making it clear here. Drugs filled some of this void. I could smoke chronic and listen to rap, and there were things that went along with that told me what to wear and how to behave. But I was still haunted by fears and doubts that the church was right, that I made a huge mistake and was now bound for hell no matter what I did. At some point, Brandon started taking me to nightclubs with a big group of his friends, letting me use his ID. The first time I was so scared that I wouldn't get in, I memorized everything on his ID. Of course, the bouncers didn't even really look at it. And so there I was in this huge, dark, crowded room with hundreds of kids. In the parking lot before we went in, we pounded Bud Light and shots of Jägermeister because you had to be 21 to drink, but only 18 for admission. I'd never been anywhere like that club. The music was pumping, techno and hip hop, heavy on the bass. Lights were flashing, the floor was throbbing. Brandon had a group of about 30 friends, and they gradually made their way up the stage dancing. I kind of hung back and watched as he went behind this girl and started bumping and grinding on her. She didn't slap him or push him away. She went along with it. After a bit, I saw a pretty blonde girl and tried to do the same thing. We wound up dancing till 2 or 3 in the morning, and I got her phone number. It took about 2 weeks to get up the courage to call her, but I did, and she agreed to go to the movies with me. I never had a date before, so I was really nervous. One of my brothers lent me his car. When I went to pick her up, I was so shaky I felt I had to explain. So I told her it was my first time living on my own, and that because of that, everything was kind of new to me. How old is he at this point? I didn't want to tell her about the church because I was afraid it would freak her out. Afterward, called we went to a diner called Dee's Family Restaurant. I took her on a few more dates, but I didn't really feel a connection with her, so I just stopped calling. My work schedule was one of the few things that gave my life form and consistency. I gained confidence over time and stopped having Nathan speak for me. I got to know some of the guys and then the boss, but that brought a new set of problems. My boss started inviting me to get stoned with him every day. The first time we were framing a house in Salt Lake City. We went over to get something from the trunk. Nathan, the boss, another coworker, and me. My boss said, let's smoke some bud. I didn't want to seem uncool, so I agreed, and we all got high. Let me tell you something. I am so grateful that I've had discussions with my son. I'm going to have to tell this in a story time because something similar happened to him, but he said no. And I ended up being the mom that was called when his friend was having a problem. So I'm listening to this and I'm thinking that he hasn't even learned how to be a leader. He can't say no, even though he doesn't really want to do it because he doesn't want to seem uncool, which is the last thing that you should be worried about, especially when you're at work with your boss. Just saying. The rest of that afternoon, I had no motor skills. I could not keep my mind on the job. I was supposed to be operating an electric saw, and all I wanted to do was sit down somewhere and eat. Being stoned and cutting wood was not my idea of a good time. I was afraid I'd slice a hand or an arm off. The noise made me anxious. After that, the boss would always offer me marijuana, and I felt unable to say no. I didn't want to get him mad. It was an important step for me when I could finally say, dude, it may work for you, but it ain't working for me. I'm struggling over here and working really hard. I'm just way too high. He said, no problem, man. It's your preference. And that took the pressure off. Good. I was so used to either being a drone and doing what I was told or completely rebelling and not doing anything. Being able to tell him how I felt took some strength. It was one of the many skills I had to learn to function outside the church. Wow. So many lost boys stay lost because they can't do that. They don't really know how to negotiate these kinds of situations and make their needs known at work or at home. They stay in unhealthy relationships or job situations or behave irresponsibly because they don't know what to do other than obey or disobey. They can't find a middle ground because they have never been taught to think for themselves. Their drug problems escalate because they have a hard time saying no or avoiding situations in which the issue will arise. Unfortunately, I've seen this happen again and again and again to my friends and at times to some of my brothers. Unlike many lost boys, Unlike many lost boys, I was lucky to have my older brothers and some of the other key people in my life to show me the way. When Felicia had worked cleaning houses, one of her employers had been a kind elderly woman named Sandy. She did not belong to our church but lived in the neighborhood. When I met her, she was probably in her 60s and used a wheelchair. She lived on her own in a big, rambling house. Her husband had left her, and she had several grown children who visited only rarely. Her main companions were her two Siamese cats. Brandon got to know her first. I think he stayed in her basement when he first left home. Now we started doing some odd jobs for her around the house. She would ask us how we were doing, and I found that I could really talk to her. She would listen and not judge. I told her why I left home and described my relationship with my dad and the struggles I had with church. She found the conflict in our family heartbreaking and infuriating. She was disgusted by the way the church split families apart. She thought my parents should have done more to help us boys. We were still teenagers, and yet we had no financial support from them at all. I told her that compared to most of the lost boys, we were extremely fortunate. Some of them never saw their parents or siblings again. My brothers and I at least had each other and mom. My brothers and I at least had each other and mom stayed in contact. But Sandy could see that I was having a hard time. She wanted to help. One of my biggest problems was that I relied completely on my brothers for transportation. I couldn't afford a car. I was just 16. Okay, so he's 16 and he's working. Nothing about school. So I was too young to get a loan. Go out and find a $4,000 car and I'll buy it for you, she said when she realized that having my own wheels would make the most difference for me. I was blown away. I tried to tell her that she didn't need to do that, and I wasn't telling her my problems because I wanted something from her. I insist. You're not going to get out of it. I'm going to buy it for you anyway, she said every time I tried to tell her no. I finally said I would pay her back if she needed me to, and I did more work for her. I bought a white Volkswagen Jetta, and it did make my life a lot easier. For a while, I'd spend every Sunday with Sandy, just talking and helping her around the house a bit. She had done me a huge favor, and I wanted to do right by her. But I enjoyed it too, and it felt good to make her feel less lonely. Oh. She helped me to understand people outside the church and to figure out what I wanted and who I was. I could talk to her about most things, and I only hope I helped her half as much as she helped me. That's beautiful. That is beautiful. I feel myself getting emotional because I often find myself feeling, sad for people who don't have family close by. It's like my mom, and it's not old. My mom's in her 60s, and I moved closer to her when she was going through some health things because I, wanted to make sure that she had family by her, because the next closest, person is like 4 hours away. And I just feel like, it's important that we're there for our people if we can be. See, I done lost my spot right in my mouth. Okay. About a year after I moved in with my brothers, Clayne and his girlfriend moved in together, and the lease on our apartment ended. I began a period of bouncing around from place to place. I got a lot better at meeting girls and hanging out with them. In fact, I found that girls really loved lost boys. Unlike many men our age, most of us actually wanted commitment. We looked for frequent contact and connection. We didn't want casual sex. We didn't play games. We even wanted to get to know their families. Lost boys didn't complain about hanging out with mom and dad or going to family functions. Indeed, we actively sought them out. We were unlike any other boyfriends they had ever had. Fear of settling down was definitely not our main issue. A lot of women also liked the idea of rescuing someone. So many of the guys I knew who left Short Creek actually got engaged very quickly after leaving the church. Of course, we were awkward at social functions at first, and as a result, some guys got engaged to pretty much the first woman who would go out with them. But unlike other men, they were happy to hang out with the in-laws and aunts and cousins, in part, I think, because they wanted to replace the big families they had grown up in. That's exactly what it is. And although I had my brothers, I did miss my dad and our whole family despite all the fights. I didn't know it then, but around this time, Clayne and Felicia were working on something that would begin to mend that rift. Okay, let's see. Chapter 18. Family values. Nothing I did was ever good enough, I told Dad. I could see him struggling to control his anger, his urge to argue and defend himself. But we were in what I imagined was probably the largest and most complicated family therapy session Jan had ever conducted. She was a warm, motherly presence. Her brown hair and build looked very similar to my mom's. We were seated in a plain room in the VA hospital around a large conference table. Dad's two wives and Clayne, Don, David, Brandon, Nathan, Patricia, Benjamin, Linda, and I. Clayne had set the event in motion. He'd read or seen something about PTSD, and it clicked for him. This could be what's wrong with our dad. The bouts of anger, the distance, the hypervigilance, and rapid changes in temper and mood. All the symptoms he'd read about, plus, of course, the fact that Dad had seen combat in Vietnam seemed to fit. He went to Felicia because he thought that she was the person that Dad would most likely heed to. He told her what he had learned. She agreed that it was worth exploring, and they arranged a time to talk to him. Felicia and Clayne gave our whole family a great gift by doing this. Yeah. When we heard what they had learned, Dad thought that what they were saying made sense. He agreed to go to the VA hospital in Salt Lakes to seek help. After a few months or so in therapy with Jan, she decided that some family sessions might not only aid his recovery, but help all of us reconcile. Mom had called everyone to arrange it, so now, here we were. The ground rules were that we could talk about anything that was bothering us or had hurt us in the past, and that Dad had to listen, not argue or use anger to silence us. Jan started by explaining the symptoms of PTSD and how it affects veterans. When someone is in combat, he is fighting for his life. The fear that this produces automatically generates anger. When you think about it, the two feelings aren't that far apart. If you ever seen a cornered animal or someone in a car accident reacting to the person who hit them, even if fault is hard to determine, you can clearly see this relationship. When flight is impossible, fight is the first response. Anger gives you a better chance of survival, but this high level of arousal floods the body with stress hormones, and it is difficult for the body to simply turn off these responses when you get home, whether it's from a war or any other traumatic event. The experience of extreme stress puts people with PTSD on a hair trigger. Afterward, even the tiniest threat is enough to flood the brain and body with stress hormones. This makes sense if you think about it from a survival perspective. Reacting quickly can save your life, but being hyped up like this all the time is not a pleasant experience. It can make vets with PTSD irritable and aggressive. In fact, if they experience emotions or sensations that remind them of their trauma, they may react with aggression and violence before they are even aware that they have done so. The lower part of the brain can actually trigger this kind of behavior in a way that is really hard for people with PTSD to control. Again, this is useful if you are in a situation where it is kill or be killed, but it can wreck, but it can wreak pure havoc back home, particularly in your relationships. I learned a lot more about this later when I realized that I too suffered from this disorder. I was about to say, he probably suffered from it too because of what he experienced, not just from his father, but from Warren, from a lot of the adults around him. That is a stressful environment. And I think that a lot of people who've been in cults have probably had this problem and they don't even realize it. In therapy, Dad learned all about PTSD and how to manage his anger better. He had uncovered the triggers that set him off and learned how to avoid them or calm himself if he encountered them. I realized that this meant that many times in the past, when he reacted with anger to his family, we hadn't been the real targets. He hadn't meant to terrify us the way he did. It was part of him that had worked in combat but wasn't so helpful in civilian life. Jan told us she knew that many of us had left home on bad terms with Dad, and she hoped we would use these sessions to clear the air and restore our relationships. Clayne spoke first. I think he made a joke about being the most effed up. He said that he was glad that Dad was getting help and that this itself was all he needed from him now. Dad and Clayne had reconciled earlier, but Clayne had a very hard time trusting therapy because of his bad experiences as a teenager. He was also ashamed because he hadn't been able to kick his drugs, so he mostly listened. Next, each brother in turn talked about how Dad's anger had affected him. All of our complaints were pretty similar. His rage had terrified us, and we didn't feel we could come to him for support or advice. Dad's face got red, and he couldn't restrain himself from arguing back quite a few times, saying that if we'd just been obedient and had done what we were told, we wouldn't have set him off. But Jan was in firm control of the session, and she always brought the focus back to us. As I listened to my brothers, it amazed me how much Dad respected Jan and accepted her guidance. Yeah, he's accepting the guidance of a woman. I could see that he really wanted the best for us because the easy thing for him to do would have been to refuse to participate. That is so true. I've said it before and I say it again. I used to go to therapy a lot. I still go. It's something that I've learned after things that I've been through that probably will be never ending for me. It's just the frequency changes. So there's times where I might have like a 3-month check-in, and then there's times where I may be in a session, 2 and 3 times a week. I'm just saying, like, it varies. With that being said, it's hard at first, but boy, oh boy, does it pay off. At least it did for me. Okay, back to the book. The easiest thing would be for him to do. I'm trying to reread this sentence and I'm jacking it up. I could see that he really wanted the best for us because the easy thing for him to do would have been to refuse to participate, but he stuck with it. Watching him, I began to understand for the first time how hard our way of life must have been for him too. Growing up, I never thought that much about the level of stress he'd been under, with 3 wives and 20 children always wanting his attention and love. That's so much. 20 kids. With memories of the horrific experience he had in the war hunting him. It was no wonder he was often angry. As a kid, I was naturally focused on my own perspective. Now, I could see Dad's side too. It's amazing how when you get older, you see certain things. Like, the older I've gotten is the more I understand the way my parents and other adults around me operated because of their experiences, right? So hearing this, it's like, okay, light bulb. My dad's been through some stuff too. Nathan used the therapy to confront Felicia as well, telling her how she made him feel worthless, that her constant screaming and focusing on everything he did wrong had really hurt him. She too tried to argue, but again, Jan said that the session was for the kids to air their complaints so that we could just get everything out in the open. Jan, you are right with me. When it was my turn, I didn't say much that was different from what my other brothers had said. I felt ignored. I felt I wasn't able to live up to what Dad wanted from me, and that made me feel awful about myself. Again, Dad tried to justify himself, but Jan reminded him that he needed to listen. He did, and so did Mom and Felicia. I wonder if he's going to tell about, Warren. Let's see. I wasn't sure that therapy would work, but over the 5 to 10 sessions we had, we really did clear the air. Our relationship didn't become perfect, but now we had one. I was proud that my dad had gotten help, and I even went for a few sessions alone. I told Jan about how lost and confused I felt and how I didn't know what to do with this life on the outside of the church. My childhood had made me wary about family life, and I had no idea what kind of work I wanted to do. I didn't feel that I really knew how to have a relationship with a woman, and I felt aimless, purposeless. Wow. Mm. At least when I'd been in the church, I knew where I was going. Now I had all the fears of hell, but no promise of any kind of heaven. Oh, it's hard to explain just how strange it is to lose your community, most of your family, an entire belief system and way of life. It's often hard for outsiders to see why people live the way my family had, but there are certainly advantages to certainty. While I had often felt lost in my huge family, there was no doubt that I truly belonged to something greater than myself, that I had somewhere I truly belonged. Now, I wasn't at all sure where I fit in, and my life reflected my aimlessness. I'm not quite sure of the sequence of events in this period, but at one point I lived in a completely chaotic house with my brothers and Sandy. We were selling large amounts of marijuana, and so there were people coming and going all the time. At that house, we had constant parties with lots of drinking and loud music. There always seemed to be someone crashed on the floor, always some kind of drama. I had to leave there because it became way too chaotic for me. It was just not how I wanted to live. The problem was, I still didn't know how I did want to live. And I would soon learn that Klein had decided to answer this question in as negative as a way as possible. Oh, y'all. All right. Yeah, I'm going to read one more chapter. And I already see the title of it. And I'm probably going to have to put up a little warning. Chapter 19, Losing Klein. The woman's voice on the other line was so soft and indistinct. I couldn't hear who it was. I was at Mom's house, so it could have been any of my sisters or half sisters or even Felicia, but it didn't sound like any of them. A wrong number? The woman was obviously distraught and sounded desperate. As I paced in the den, surrounded by the tan leather recliners that dozens of children and grandchildren had climbed on, Mom was moving around in the kitchen, preparing lunch. Oh, goodness. It was January 2002. I don't know why I'm already getting emotional. I guess I just hate that people feel like this is their only way out. And I don't even know what Klein's done, but losing Klein and him saying that he did something negative makes me think that he, unalived himself. And it's just, yeah. Sorry. Whew. The voice continued in an agonizing, repetitive mumble. And then all at once, I realized who it was and what she was saying. Her Vietnamese accent got stronger as she went on. It could only be Klein's wife, Han. Klein killed himself. Klein killed himself, was what she said. He has a gun and he killed himself. I froze. Klein was the father of 4 kids by then. and a stepfather to one. He was only 29. He had a gorgeous wife, and his 2 children with Hun were just toddlers. I said I'd be there soon as possible, hung up and hustled Mom and Dad into their minivan. I told them the bare facts that Han, I hope I'm saying it right, H-A-N, had conveyed, but that I still couldn't accept. At the time, I was the only one of my brothers who was still close with Clayne. No one in the family had told me to cut him off for being an addict, but pretty much everyone else had backed away. Even I had put some distance between us. A few months before this, he'd come to me with a desperate story about how Han and the kids would be out in the street if I didn't give him money to cover his rent. I signed over my whole paycheck, and of course, he bought heroin with it as soon as he got the cash. I've been furious with him, but I couldn't let go of my big brother entirely. Although I didn't know it then how much we had in common, I must have felt it in some way. Clayne and his previous girlfriend had 2 children together, but their relationship hadn't survived their daughter Cheyenne's death from SIDS and Clayne's ongoing addiction. After they broke up, Clayne had met Han in a bar where he had been working as a bouncer. She is petite, with glossy black hair and full lips. He wanted her the moment he saw her. Ironically, Clayne had decided shortly before he met her that he wanted a calm, submissive woman who wouldn't argue with him. He had enough drama. He had that stereotyped view of Asian women, so he thought she was the answer to his prayers when she came into the club. As it turned out, she is a real spitfire with a feisty temperament that sometimes clashed with Clayne's more easygoing nature. Nonetheless, they had fallen in love. He even converted to Buddhism and married her in a Vietnamese Buddhist temple in Salt Lake. Clayne seemed to find some real comfort in the religion she'd been raised in. He'd been a bit scared to tell my father that he was falling in love with a Vietnamese Buddhist, but when he did, Dad said that if he truly loved her, he should marry her. My parents have never really embraced the racist beliefs of our church in the first place, and they now rejected them entirely. But Clayne's marriage, unsurprisingly, had been deteriorating because he remained unable to kick heroin. About 6 months before he died, Clayne had seemed to have a breakthrough during addiction treatment. He had been going to rehab since he was 15, but most of them, particularly Provo Cannon School, that's right, he did go there, had simply abused and humiliated him. The last time he was in treatment, he had been at the LDS hospital for a slow inpatient methadone detox. The psychologist there decided to try hypnosis, believing that his symptoms were so severe that he had to have suffered from some kind of childhood trauma, and he did. Although this way of using hypnosis is controversial because some people have recalled false memories under its influence, what Clayne recalled was unfortunately all too true. Sadly, when he left treatment, although he was no longer ill from heroin withdrawal, he hadn't had the means to cope with what he learned there because he put the thought of probably his abuse in the back of his mind and he suppressed it. And hypnosis probably revealed it, and they didn't give him the tools to deal with it. Man. Under hypnosis, Clayne revealed that Warren had AR'd him repeatedly when he was about kindergarten age. 2 of Warren's brothers had been there, standing guard at the bathroom door. See, this is the crap that pisses me off because they did the same thing to Brent. Are those brothers in jail? Did somebody do something to them? I hope so. Sometimes the brothers had actively participated in the assault. My parents had always wondered why their oldest son had become an addict so young and why his condition seemed so. Mm. They spent thousands of dollars on many different types of treatment, going into debt because insurance wouldn't pay for all of it. Now, finally, there was an explanation. Hideous as it was, Mom and Dad were shattered by the news. Clayton had recalled these memories in detox, in the voice of the 5-year-old boy he'd been at the time. The hospital had called my parents in for an emergency family session. The psychologist who had done the hypnosis helped Clayton tell them. My mother felt as though she had been shot through the heart. At one point, she sat Clayton on her lap, her fully grown oldest son, the one who had given her so much trouble, the one she never seemed to be able to help, and held them while they all cried. It was the worst possible feeling for a parent. The sense of being unable to ease the pain of your child combined with the feeling that you should have been able to prevent the hurt in the first place. Then came rage. Both of my parents wanted. Give me one moment. Ooh. Sorry, you guys. I didn't mean to cry this much. Both of my parents wanted to eviscerate and annihilate Warren and the brothers who had concealed and enabled his crimes. My father was serious. He would kill Warren and torture his 2 brothers for either making it worse or standing by and doing nothing. I just... But Clayton insisted he didn't want blood on Dad's shoulders because he didn't want him to go to prison and he'd be unable to raise his family. About 6 of his children were still living at home with Mom or with Felicia. Clayton made Dad swear to him that he wouldn't murder Warren or harm his brothers. He didn't want the past to destroy any more of our family than it already had. He felt guilty enough. Mom sunk into despair. Her children were her world. Her job was to protect them. How could she have failed to see what was going on with her own kids? And how could her church have condoned such evil? That's the part. Because I know it's natural as a parent to blame yourself when these type of things happen. And in some cases, it is the parent's fault. I'm not going to sit there and say it's not. In this situation, they've created a world in which abusers get to thrive. And that's what the real problem is that the secrecy, the power that you give these beings, these people, these prophets, these priesthood holders, it creates this. And you got to do something to mess that up. You got to educate your kids. He said that they never even had talks about, sex ed or anything like that. So they don't even know what these things are because they're not being taught. Certain incidents now haunted her. The times Clayton soiled his pants when he was around 6, and Felicia had fits about it, but Mom had just cleaned him up. Furious with Felicia, but getting no explanation from Clayton. The trip to the hospital when Clayton was peeing blood with no medical cause to be found. Warren hadn't been content. Oh no. Warren hadn't been content with just R-ing Clayton. He tortured him in unspeakable ways. It wasn't bearable. It wasn't even conceivable. How could someone do such things to a child, to her child, to my brother? Before Clayton got out the hospital, Mom and Dad gathered my full siblings together to tell us what had happened. They wanted us to try to understand Clayton better, to have more sympathy for him. My memories of this time are incredibly fuzzy because I was hit with one disaster after another in the space of 6 months or so. All I remember from this gathering is that I was horrified and that I thought it explained a lot about Clayne's life. I didn't yet understand the relevance it would have in my own. I still spaced out when anything threatened to bring back my past. And even though everyone tried to support him when he came out of detox, Clayne continued to fall apart. The memories ate away at him. He rapidly became re addicted to heroin, which he was injecting. He sold more cocaine to support his habit. Despite being in debt to dealers for hundreds of thousands of dollars because a shipment had gotten stolen before he went into treatment, everything went downhill. Even now that he knew what had happened, even now that his self destructiveness had a logical explanation, he still couldn't forgive himself. He just couldn't find a way to integrate what had happened and live without anesthesia. He thought it was too late for him. He blamed himself for becoming addicted, for being unable to forget, even for having been abused, though he knew that that made no sense. He hated himself for not being a better father to his kids, for not being able to stop using. But life was unbearable for him when he did. There was just too much pain. A few months before Clayne died, I went fishing with him and his family. Fishing was one of the few things that he still enjoyed besides heroin. Outside in nature was one of the few places where he found peace. He took me aside, purportedly to go smoke a bowl. He told Hen we were going further upstream to fish. He sat next to me in this cannon by the river and began to cry silently. He said, "I have something I want to tell you. I don't want you to freak out or anything, but I have to get it off my chest." I said, "You know I'm here. Whatever you need to tell me, I'll listen." He didn't go into much detail, but he did talk about how he'd been molested by Warren, saying that it was important to him for me to hear directly from him about what had happened. He said that Warren had done things to him that I couldn't even imagine. It took a part out of me that I never really got back, he said. As he said that, I could see for a moment the child he had been, not the broken man he was now. I was overcome with sadness. I felt the familiar feeling of being out of my body. I was blotting out my own thoughts so I could try to help him. I couldn't bear to see how much pain he had inside. I wanted so badly to be able to do something for him. But like my parents, I was powerless. Clayne seemed completely lost. I'd never seen him so far down. I said the things you say in those situations, but I felt like I just couldn't reach him because he was the big brother whom I had idolized. It felt even worse. We were both hidden behind such complex armor to block out our feelings that it was impossible to get through. My own memories didn't come back then. In some ways, I wish they had so I could have told him, and maybe he wouldn't have felt so isolated and ashamed. But both of us had fought so hard to keep those memories down. We could deal with only a tiny bit at a time. So after that short, intense conversation, we just finished for a few hours, smoked some weed, tried to lighten up a bit, and went back to Hen and the kids. By the time my parents and I arrived at Clayne's small 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Salt Lake, the police were everywhere. Hen's mother, a tiny Vietnamese woman who spoke no English, was trying to calm her daughter and grandchildren. Clayne had apparently gone into the bathroom, fired at the wall, and then, before anyone else even knew what was going on, shot himself in the head. Hen, trailed by all of her family, had raced into the bathroom after she heard the first shot. They'd all seen his ruined body and the blood-spattered walls. They were in deep shock. The police tried to stop me from going in there. They told me about how suicides usually fire a test shot first to see if they can take it, and only then fire the fatal shot. But I just couldn't believe that Clayne was dead. Even though it made no sense, I was sure I would find out that it was a mistake, that someone else had shot himself in Clayne's bathroom. I pushed past them and now have written on my brain forever a sight no one should ever see. Of course, it was Clayne lying there. Time slowed down. I felt like I was moving underwater. I tried to prevent my parents from getting into the bathroom and seeing him, but that was about all I could think of to do. I couldn't believe that I had lost my brother and that Warren was still out there, leading the FLDS, living a life of privilege while destroying so many lives around him. I knew I had to do something, but it would take another trauma before my own history unfolded and I figured out how I could help. My trauma resulted from a mistake Clayton and I had made a few months before he died. He was going to meet one of his drug connections, a guy I can only describe as a kingpin. Clayton asked if I would ride with him, and I said yes. I had no idea where we were going. Otherwise, I wouldn't have even considered it. We drove up to an estate with stone lions guarding a gateway to a long driveway. For some reason, he decided that it would be okay for me to come inside with him, something he should have known better than to even suggest. I think he must have been beyond caring by this point. We walked up the driveway past the fountains to a huge, imposing home. There were marble columns at the front. It was exactly what you would imagine from the movies, right down to the guys with Uzis, dark suits, and sunglasses guarding the front door. Clayton's contact had clearly never had an original thought in his life, but that didn't really matter in the cocaine business. Clayton told me to keep my eyes down when I went in until he said it was okay. He went off to talk with his connection. I was too scared to look up or say a word. We eventually wound up in a huge room with more men, more guns, and the biggest pile of cocaine I'd ever saw. But it was clear that Clayton's friend was furious with him for having brought someone he didn't know into his house. And it didn't help that I refused to sample the cocaine, having never tried it before and figuring this was not the best time to start. The repercussions of that reckless visit hit me just a few weeks after Clayton's funeral. Apparently, the dealers worried that I would somehow connect my brother's death with their businesses, and that I would tell police and bring them to the man's house. That would obviously have been a problem for them, so now I was the problem. I think I had driven to Smith's, the grocery store where I'd shop so often for food with my mom's when I was a child. I'm pretty sure that it was there in Smith's parking lot that the three guys were waiting for me when I got back to my car. Again, a lot of this time is really confusing, but I know they pulled up next to me in a Lincoln Continental. Before I even knew what was happening, they pushed me into the back seat, blindfolded me, and tied my hands behind my back. I was sure I was going to be killed. I knew immediately who they were, but I had no idea where they took me because I was blindfolded. They drove around for a while and then pushed me out of the car. They told me that Clayton had worked for them and wouldn't want me to say anything about it. If you want problems, just go to the police and start shit up, one said. But I would suggest you don't. If you want a quiet, happy life, just forget it. And then they started beating on me, punching and kicking and hitting from all directions while I was helpless on the ground. When they were done, they drove me back to my car and said, "See ya." I straggled back to my parents' house, horrified my mother horrifying my mother with a black eye and numerous bruises. She had begun to dread seeing or hearing from us boys, fearing for our lives. The next shock my family would suffer, however, did not involve the younger generation, but the older one. And that is where I'm ending it today. This was a heavy reading, y'all. It was heavy because I just kept thinking about this poor man who at one point was a little boy who suffered unimaginable things because he doesn't tell us about the torture, but we know it was so bad that they found blood in his urine. Like, what in the world? And the fact that this man is still alive, like Warren should have been like executed by now. What is going on? Anyways, you guys, thank you so much. I apologize again, but this was a hard read. I'm definitely going to have to put up the warning. Thank you guys so much. Until next time. Peace.